debate if everything both of us said was instantly fact-checked by an agreed-to group of people out there that we move forward. But that probably wouldn't get very far in the debate. No, I'm looking forward to debating the president, and I'm going to lay out as clearly as I can what I think we have to do to bring this country back and build it back better. And I'm looking forward to the debate.
Thanks. Great. Woman from NPR.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. One of the things that I've heard a lot from voters across the country is that a lot of them are worried and concerned about some of the ongoing violence we've seen in cities in this country, including the situation in Kenosha, Wisconsin, where you're headed. I'm curious, obviously, you're not president now and Donald Trump is, but I'm curious, if you were president, what would you do to ensure that people are kept safe in situations like these?
First of all, I wouldn't incite violence. I'd condemn it when it occurred. I would move to, look, the vast majority of police officers are good, decent, honorable women and men. They pin on that shield every morning, and they have a right to go home that night safely. The vast majority. But just those who are not good cops, all the police I've dealt with my whole life, and I've been dealing with, I've gotten overwhelming support from law enforcement through my whole career. They're the ones that want to get rid of the bad cops even more than anybody else does, because it reflects on them, number one. Number two, I would make sure everybody understood, if I were president, that any violence, protesting is a right and free speech is a right. But to engage in violence, burning, looting, the rest, in the name of protesting is wrong. And the persons should be held accountable for their actions. And so what I'd be doing is I'd be bringing people together in the White House right now. I'd be having that police commission set up. I'd have law enforcement at the table. I'd have the community at the table. I'd have people and saying, how do we get through this? What do we do to deal with this? Because I believe the vast majority of the community at writ large, as well as law enforcement, want to straighten things out, not inflame things. But this president keeps throwing gasoline in the fire every place he goes. I noticed, I didn't watch much of it, but I watched the reports from all of you, not all, from the press. And, you know, when he was asked about what should be done with regard to a young man shot in the back 7 times in front of his children, I didn't hear much of anything come from him. What should we be doing about it? And he went down the line. So I wish he'd take responsibility. As much as he'd like to be running against somebody else, he's running against me, Joe Biden. And the fact is that he is not acting very responsibly.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
You've outlined.
I'm sorry. Where am I? Over here? Okay.
You've outlined your plan to reopen schools safely, but what about what happens in the interim? Right now, millions of parents across the country are facing this very impossible task of trying to work full-time and help their children full-time to learn virtually. What is your message to these parents, and what can you do to help them while you work to reopen schools?
Help is on the way. I've laid out a clear plan for child care, a clear plan for starting early education as well, so 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds are in school and like, but I'm not president right now. What we should be doing is we should be providing for more help for people who in fact are trying to juggle the choice between, do I stay home with my 3, 4, or 5-year-old and take care of them in the middle of this COVID problem, or do I go to work and earn a salary? What do I do? And so that's why I have a major initiative to deal with child care and elder care, so people can be adequately paid to come and take care of folks, children, as well as the elderly that you may be taking care of, a parent, a husband or wife may be taken care of, as well as making sure that those folks are able to get back to work. And that's why focusing on daycare centers and making sure they're safe and healthy now is equally as important as dealing with, almost as equally important as dealing with schools. And we should be providing all of the PPE and all of the safety that is necessary in sanitary capacity to allow them to open. Hundreds of them have been opening because some states have gone in and done that. There should be universal guidance coming from the President of the United States of America. There should be basic standards to how, in fact, in what circumstances you can safely open a daycare center. You can safely open a child care center. In addition to that, in the future, the idea, this has brought home a number of glaring problems we have in America. This whole pandemic and what's happened in terms of jobs. The idea that we're in a situation where you have so many parents who have to make the difficult choice as a single parent or both working parents to decide whether one gives up their salary and stays home with a child under the age of 5 or 6 and or somehow leaves them with somebody that is not particularly qualified and goes to work so they can earn a living is a choice that is not, we shouldn't be making. We're the only industrialized country in the world that forces people to make that kind of choice. So there should be, no one should have to pay more than 7% of their income to provide for child care and be able to go to work. This is something that is a major element of my Build Back Better program. But in the meantime, the most important thing that can be done is have CDC issue really straightforward guidelines on what circumstances you should be able to open up your daycare center or your child care center now. And there should be clear standards. And states should have the wherewithal to be able to go out and inspect those facilities now. But you know, one thing I haven't mentioned, and I think it warrants mentioning, you know, one of the things we did, remember, when we inherited the Great Recession and we were going into the tank, heading off the cliff for heading to a depression, I was able to convince 3 Republicans to change their vote, and we ended up with the so-called Recovery Act, which spent over $800 billion in 18 months, kept us from going into depression. But what did we do? We spent billions of dollars making sure that states were able to maintain their essential workers. Everyone from their fire departments, their school teachers, their doctors, their nurses, their public hospitals. Now what's happening? This Republican administration will not support that, and the Republican leadership in the United States Senate will not support it. So what's happening? We don't have that help. It's not out there. And states are in real trouble. And to quote my good friend Mitch McConnell, he says, let the states go bankrupt. States have to balance their budgets under the law. Communities, counties, cities, they have to balance their budget. There's a reason why the federal government is able to run a deficit, to compensate in times of real economic crisis. And what's happening? Nothing, nothing. And guess what? We came out of that recession with the longest spurt of economic growth of any administration in American history. But these guys don't, and I could go on. Businesses. Look at the money that was passed under the CARES Act for businesses. Small businesses, be able to stay open. You got tens of thousands of them going out of business, many of them permanently. Why? Because the money didn't get to small businesses. They're not open. We should be dealing with those businesses that have been burned out and damaged. We should be providing federal help for those businesses to get back on their feet. But this administration seems to think it's all of a sudden going to go away, like angel dust is going to be sprayed around. Everything's going to be okay. I just don't get it. They have to know better. They have to know better. And we had an example just the last administration, how much good you can do and how much growth you can generate. I just don't get these guys. I really don't. Not a joke. I've been doing this a long time. But I've never seen a president lack as much leadership, inability to make a deal, because so many of the teachers also have other pre-existing conditions that lend itself to the fact that if they were to contract the COVID disease, COVID-19, that they would be very susceptible to be in real trouble. So it's understandable why they're doing it. But the first thing to do is make sure that all the protective capacity that we have available to us is made available, and then make choices about whether or not, let the districts make choices about whether or not they open fully, whether they rotate, and whether or not those teachers are able to teach from home and remote learning. But it's really understandable why they would. Look what's happened in this COVID crisis so far. 100,000 people have died who are above the age of 65. 100,000 out of the 200 and some that have died, or not 200 and some yet, it's 189 or whatever it is now. Estimated, I heard today, the estimates range from two significant universities. One is going to be as many as 239, I think, and another one said by December 312. Yeah, I don't know that, but that's, it's going to go higher. And so I just don't, I don't understand why it's a political problem. What is the politics about not being willing to go in and help provide the protective capacity for people to be able to go back to work and to go to school? I just don't, I can't fathom it.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. You talked today about reopening schools. Wanted to ask you about something you said last week about the potential of having to shut down the economy again. You were asked if you'd be willing to shut it down if your health experts advise you to do so, and you said, quote, "I will be prepared to do whatever it takes," and that you would listen to the scientists. But I'm curious how you would do that at a federal level and how you would balance that call to shut down potentially if you had economic advisors saying, you do this again, you could plunge the country into an even deeper economic crisis.
Well, look, I know you're tired of hearing me say this. I've been saying it since last January. The idea that you're going to be able to get the economy back on track without getting COVID under control is completely counterintuitive. It's not there. It can't happen. So unless we're able to deal with the disease and drastically cut its impact on people's confidence of being able to either go to work or walk into a business or do business, then it doesn't matter a lot. There is going to be no need, in my view, to be able to shut down the whole economy. I got asked by David Muir a question, if I was asked to shut everything down. I took that as a generic question, am I going to follow the science? I am going to insist, and I insist now without any authority, that every responsible person in this country, when they're out in public or not with a cohort that they have lived with because they know they haven't spread it to your husband, wife, etc., that they wear a mask, and keep socially distanced. You can take a mask off when you're 12, 15 feet away, but I would really, really make the case. And by the way, when I find these folks talking about my freedom, I talk about patriotism. Why do you wear a mask? To protect your neighbor, to keep someone else from getting sick and maybe dying. I call that patriotic. This is the United States of America. Every generation has made sacrifices to help others in moments of crises.
But so you don't see, you had suggested there would be some kind of a federal mandate about masks, and now you're saying encourage people?
No, here's, what I suggested was, I would ask every person in authority, there's a question whether or not a president, under the Constitution, could mandate everyone wear a mask. And remember, all during the primary, I'd have a lot of people telling me I would, by executive order, do. I'm a constitutionalist. You know, you can't do things the Constitution doesn't allow you the power to do. What I would be doing is putting as much pressure as I could on every governor, every senator, every mayor, every county executive, every local official, and everyone in business, putting pressure on them to say, what you're doing is irresponsible. Make sure you wear a mask and maintain social distancing. And the vast majority of the American people accept that notion.
One more quick campaign question. You raised $364.5 million, your campaign in the DNC last month, record for a monthly haul, apparently. How are you going to spend it?
You want to go to dinner? No. I tell you what, look, what I'm having to spend a lot of it on is to counter the lies that are being told by Trump's campaign and Swift voters out there, the new PAC. But what I'm trying to do is spend most of that. And by the way, I think the average contribution was like $40. We have over 1,600,000 people who contribute in the middle of this economic crisis, somewhere between $5, $10, $15. I'd say that shows some genuine enthusiasm about wanting to make sure that we have a chance of becoming President of the United States. And so what I will spend most of it doing is trying to explain to the American people how I want to unite the country, what I want to do to make the country better, why I'm so confident we can do it, why I'm so confident that we can bring the country together and be in a better position than before this crisis occurred. Because there's been so many fissures exposed as a consequence of what's happened that people are now realizing, my Lord, I didn't know that people in that circumstance didn't have that kind of help. I didn't know whatever. And so I think we have an enormous opportunity to bring the country together and once again lead the world. And you've heard me say it 100 times, not just by the example of our power, but the power of our example. Thank you all so very much for taking the time. Thank you. Thank you. I know you always ask a hostile question, but go ahead.
You said, and you have said recently, that you warned, step up to the mic so you can hear us at home. You said that you warned President Trump in January that there was going to be a pandemic and what needed to be done. If you knew that, then why were you still hosting crowded campaign rallies in March?
No, what I talked about was not what had to be done. What I said, you got to take this seriously. You've got to insist that we have access to Wuhan. Insist that we have access in China to find out for ourselves. We had 44 people from CDC there. You cannot continue to talk about the president of China saying he's done a marvelous job. He's doing a great job. When it got up to March, I kept saying, look, you've got to invoke, and you remember, I think I was the first, I may be mistaken, person calling about the Defense Production Act. We don't have enough of the, it's amazing we use a phrase like PPE and the public knows what that is now, but protective equipment and gear and ventilators. Use that authority. Use it to go out there now and don't wait. And don't wait to talk about the need for us to have masks and don't wait to talk about, that's what I talked about. And then I began to lay out for him, we actually had a conversation. I can't remember when it was, I think it was March, maybe it was April, in that range. And he said, if Biden wants to help, I want to talk to him. So I talked to him. I laid out what I thought should be done to be able to reopen safely and the things we should do. And he was very polite, he listened, and he said he'd think about it, and that was the end of it. And so what began to become really clear is that as the science began to show that this was able to spread much more easily than people thought, two issues. Was a pandemic coming, and how did it what's the way it did the most damage? And as that became clearer and clearer, we concluded that we just can't continue to have these large rallies. And, think about it. Here we are, the rest of the world, the places that have done extremely well in terms of dealing with this COVID crisis around the world. We have the 5 largest countries in Europe have a population larger than the United States of America. Yet we're, in the month of August, we're losing 1,000 lives a day, and they're losing 57 a day, combined. combined, all of them combined. So I just don't, as we learn more, and we did learn more, and by March and April, we knew a whole heck of a lot more, why weren't we doing what needed to be done? Why are we being told that, don't we have plenty of protective gear? And the one big thing that I did push a lot on, I wasn't the only one, was on the need for testing and tracing and moving rapidly to make sure that you had the capacity to test and trace before it got so out of control. We need to do that now. But here's the thing, I'll end with this. I apologize for keeping you. Oh, well. Yeah. The thing that I just don't quite understand is when it's clear that some of the things that the president says are simply not true relating to this crisis. And when enormous pressure is put on professionals in the administration, from the CDC to NIH, across the board, why do we think, God willing, when we get a vaccine that is good, works, why do we think the public's going to line up to be able to take being willing to take the injection? We've lost so much confidence, the American people, in what's said. Because we're finding out, again today, plasma, well, that doesn't quite work the way we were told it was. Hell of a lot of pressure put on that person to say that. This president has said so many things that are untrue, that are just wrong. In order to do anything, he looks at it in one way. If the stock market is high and it's moving, and we're reducing the number of people who are in real trouble economically, then it doesn't matter what I say. That's the objective. That's the objective. The objective is to keep the American people safe so we can begin to get back to normal, rebuilding our economy and bringing back economic growth. Thank you all very much.